Think you know Sparta? What if I told you most of what Hollywood taught you is complete BS, from black sludge soup to shirtless battles? Let's set the record straight. Spartan boys were thrown off cliffs if weak. This myth says that if a Spartan boy was born weak or with any deformations, the elders would throw him off a cliff, especially Mount Taygetus, to keep their society strong and perfect. This story mostly comes from a writer named Plutarch, who lived hundreds of years after Sparta's golden age. He claimed that Spartan elders would inspect newborns, and if they were unfit, they'd be taken to a place called the Apothete near a cliff. But there's no real evidence they were actually thrown off. In ancient Greece, exposing a child often just meant leaving them out in the open, and that was sadly a common practice in many cities, not just Sparta. What's more interesting is that Sparta didn't have the luxury of throwing away babies left and right. They needed as many future warriors as possible, and in some cases, they even adopted strong children who had been abandoned elsewhere. Spartans were all ultra-straight, hyper-masculine guys. One of the most controversial topics about Sparta is their relationships between men, especially in the agage, the brutal training system. A common belief is that Spartans were totally straight, macho warriors. But ancient sources actually suggest otherwise. Mentor-student relationships between older and younger Spartan males often included emotional and even sexual connections. And this wasn't rare or shameful. In fact, it was sometimes encouraged as a way to build loyalty and bravery in battle. But this doesn't mean Spartans were gay in the way we use that word today. Ancient sexuality wasn't about fixed identity. It was about roles, power, and status. Spartan society saw these relationships as part of warrior bonding. Other Greek cities like Athens criticized it, but Sparta didn't really care what others thought. So were Spartans gay? Not exactly, but they definitely weren't all straight either. This part of Spartan culture is often ignored in movies, probably because it doesn't fit the hyper-masculine image Hollywood loves to sell. But the truth? Sparta was a lot more complex than red cloaks and six-packs. Spartans fought shirtless in wars. This idea mostly comes from movies and stories made long after the real Spartan times. They show Spartans fighting shirtless to look tough and fearless, but the truth is very different. Spartans wore heavy armor to protect themselves in battle. Ancient artwork and historical records show they used bronze helmets, chest plates, and large round shields called hoplons, which were essential for survival on the battlefield. Fighting without armor would have been incredibly dangerous since arrows, swords, and spears could easily cause serious injuries. Sparta's focus on discipline and winning meant they never took unnecessary, stupid risks like going into battle unprotected. What's even more important is that war was deadly serious for Spartans at that time, and they couldn't afford to fight without full protection. Their goal was to survive and win the war, not just to look impressive or heroic like movies make it seem. The famous image of shirtless Spartans comes mostly from later stories and Hollywood movies trying to make battles more exciting and deadly. But real Spartan warriors had a brain, and knew armor was important to staying alive and win the battle. Spartans were the strongest Greek army forever. Sparta was definitely a powerful military force for a long time, especially during the 5th century BCE, when they helped lead the Greek city-states against Persia in the famous battles of the Persian Wars. Their training and discipline were shockingly impressive, and they earned respect for that. However, they weren't unbeatable, and over time, other Greek armies adapted and challenged them. One of the most famous times that showed Sparta wasn't unbeatable was the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE. The Thebans, led by their general Epaminondas, used new tactics and surprise attacks to crush the Spartan army. This defeat broke Sparta's hold as the strongest power in Greece and marked the beginning of their end. Even before that, Sparta had trouble with Athens, especially during the Peloponnesian War, which lasted nearly 30 years. Sparta won in the end, but it was a long, exhausting fight that showed Sparta could be pushed to its limits and could potentially lose. What's even more interesting is how other Greek city-states developed their own strengths. Athens built a powerful navy that challenged Sparta's land forces, and later on, Macedon under Philip II and Alexander the Great changed the entire Greek military landscape, making Sparta less important. Spartan women were weak. Spartan women were some of the most independent and outspoken women in all of ancient Greece. While they didn't fight in wars like the men, they were trained from a young age to be physically strong and mentally tough. Girls trained in sports like running, wrestling, and even javelin throwing, not just for their own sake, but because the Spartans believed strong mothers would raise strong warriors. This wasn't some side tradition either. It was part of the state's philosophy, and girls were expected to train just like boys, though with different goals. Unlike women in Athens and most other Greek city-states, Spartan women could own land, inherit property, and manage wealth, which gave them more rights and a better life. When Spartan men were away at war for months or even years, the women were left in charge of the household, the estate, and the finances. In fact, by some estimates, Spartan women ended up owning nearly 40% of Sparta's land at one point, which shocked other Greeks. In Athens, women couldn't even vote or leave the house without a male guardian. But in Sparta, women ran the household while the men were off at war, and that gave them real power. Spartans didn't party. Spartan life was strict, but it wasn't joyless. In fact, festivals and public celebrations celebrations were a big part of their culture. One of the most famous was the Hyacinthiae, a 3-day festival in honor of the god Apollo. It included music, dancing, and athletic competitions, bringing together the entire city. The Gymnopedia was another huge event, where young Spartans performed dances and songs in front of the community, sometimes even nude, to show both skill and discipline. Spartans also loved music more than people think. Lyric poetry, choral singing, and instruments like the lyre were deeply respected in their society. Even their military training included movements set to music, especially during marches or drills. The famous Spartan king Agesilaus was once quoted saying that music and discipline went hand in hand. All Spartans were warriors. There's a popular belief that every Spartan was a warrior, and that the whole population trained for battle from childhood and spent their lives fighting. It's the classic image of a society full of soldiers in red cloaks and bronze helmets, always ready to die for Sparta. But while Sparta was known for its army, not everyone in Sparta was a soldier. The truth is, only a certain group of Spartan men were full-time warriors. They were called the Spartiates, also known as the Equals. These were the top citizens, and they were the ones who went through the full military training system called the agoge, starting at just 7 years old. They were the main fighters, the ones who lived by strict rules and were trained to be tough, loyal, and disciplined. But the Spartiates were actually just a small part of the population. Most people in Sparta were not warriors at all. There were the perioikoi, which means those who live around. They weren't full citizens, but they were free. They worked as traders, builders, and craftsmen. They helped run the economy and even fought in some battles, but they didn't live like the elite Spartan soldiers. Then there were the helots, who made up most of the people in Sparta. They were basically forced to farm the land and provide food for the state. They weren't trained to fight, and the Spartan government kept them under strict control. In fact, young Spartan men were sometimes secretly sent to scare or even kill helots to stop them from rising up. Even among the warrior class, not everyone stayed a soldier forever. Some men lost their position if they couldn't keep up with their duties or afford to pay for the shared meals that soldiers were required to join. Others retired from fighting and became leaders, teachers, or took care of the city's laws and decisions. The army was just one part of a much bigger system. Behind those famous warriors were thousands of workers, farmers, and helpers who made it all possible. If you're enjoying this so far, hit like, or Sparta's kicking you out of the Syssitia. Spartans were just strong bodies with no brains. People often imagine them as muscle-bound soldiers who could fight well but didn't know much else. But that image doesn't match the real Sparta at all. Spartans were trained to be smart as well as strong. The agage, their famous training system, wasn't just about them learning how to fight. It included lessons in music, public speaking, leadership, and critical thinking, as crazy and weird as it sounds like. Boys were taught how to argue, how to stay calm under pressure, and how to make quick decisions in difficult situations. Many of them were skilled in logic and sharp with words. In fact, Spartans became known across Greece for their clever, short sayings, what we now call laconic speech. When an enemy once threatened to destroy Sparta, saying, "If I enter your city, I will burn it to the ground," the Spartans simply replied, "If." That one word said everything and proves that they aren't just dumb, muscular brutes fighting people. Sparta also produced respected political leaders and diplomats. Men like King Agesilaus II weren't just warriors, they were actual thinkers who led armies, made alliances, and shaped the politics of the Greek world. Even in peace, Sparta played an important role in councils and negotiations, which required much more than just muscle. And it wasn't only the men. Spartan women, as we've seen, were known for their smart minds and perfectly chosen words. They managed homes, lands, and property while the men were away, and they were expected to be strong and wise in raising the next generation. Spartan food was disgusting black sludge. One of the most repeated stories about Sparta is that their food was awful. The image that sticks in people's minds is a bowl of gross black sludge called melazomos, or black broth. It's often described as some kind of disgusting soup made from boiled pig's blood, vinegar, and salt, so bad that even other Greeks supposedly couldn't stomach it. But while the black broth was real, the idea that all Spartan food was terrible isn't the full truth. Black broth existed, and it was a common dish in the Spartan army mess halls. It was simple, dark, and salty, designed more for energy than taste. But it wasn't the only thing Spartans ate. In fact, most Spartans, especially the ones not living in military camps, had access to a much wider variety of foods. Spartan citizens owned land worked by helots, and that land produced wheat, barley, olives, grapes, figs, cheese, and more. These ingredients were used to make bread, wine, olive oil, and other simple but decent meals. Spartan women who stayed at home while the men trained or fought were in charge of preparing meals and managing food supplies. Their families didn't live off blood soup alone. Also, Sparta held public feasts during festivals where people ate roasted meats, fresh bread, fruits, and even sweet treats like cakes made with honey. These were moments of celebration and joy, and the food reflected that. It wasn't fancy like in Athens, but it definitely wasn't sludge either. The myth of the disgusting black broth comes mostly from outsiders who didn't understand Spartan culture. There's a story of a visitor from Sybaris, a wealthy city known for luxury, who tasted the black broth and said he didn't know how Spartans could enjoy it. But the point of the dish wasn't to enjoy it. It was about Spartans building discipline, toughness, and unity. All Spartans were fearless warriors. People imagine Spartans as completely unshakable, charging into battle no matter the odds, never giving up, and never showing weakness. But the truth is, even in Sparta, a city built on toughness and discipline, not every warrior lived up to the ideal. Spartans trained from a young age to fight, to obey, and to stay calm under pressure. The agog, their brutal military training, was designed to push boys past their limits and turn them into strong soldiers. And yes, many Spartans became brave and skilled warriors, but not all of them were fearless, and not all of them were honored. In fact, Sparta had a specific term for cowards. They were called tremblers. These were men who had shown fear in battle, run from a fight, or failed to stand their ground. And the punishment wasn't light at all. A coward in Sparta didn't just lose respect, they were shamed by the community. They had to wear different clothes, sit alone at public events, and were often not allowed to marry. People avoided them in the streets, and they were treated as if they didn't fully belong. There's even a famous case from the Battle of Sphacteria in 425 BCE during the Peloponnesian War. A group of over 100 Spartans were captured by the Athenians, something that shocked the entire Greek world. Before that, people believed Spartans would rather die than surrender. But these men chose to live, and when they returned to Sparta, they faced heavy shame. Some historians suggest that over time, the harsh judgment began to soften, because even Sparta started to realize that fear is a part of being human. So, which one of these myths do you think is actually closer to the truth? Let me know in the comments below. So, next time someone brings up the Spartans, just remember, they were smarter, softer, and more human than you've been told. And now you know the truth. Also make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. If you don't, you're officially a trembler.